Good morning. Today is what is today? It's the 10th day of May 2019. So, to quickly do my good life meditation and talk a little bit about a setback and challenge that I'm working on. So the good life consists of 7 objectives and 21 principles. Yeah, that number's increased since the last time I did this publicly. I've added one objective and one new principle. Let's go over them. So the first objective is, and the objective, of course, as the title describes, are things that I'm seeking to do, ways of living, ways of being that I'm trying to live out, not just on paper, so to speak. And then the principles are the guidelines that help me to do so. The first objective, is to be always ready to die. To have my life in a state of where all my affairs are in order. That would be financially, my relationships, and with my art. For the most part, I'm doing pretty good on number 2 and 3, but not so good on number 1. So that means I've got another 9 years, actually 10 years of work left to do before I can retire. Number 2, the good and effective use of time. Just to make good use of these moments, not to race through them or to waste them away, to make good use of my time. Number 3 is the development and see how I'm doing that? I'm slowing the bike down as I remind myself to make good use of time. I'm slowing the bike down. Now I'm actually ahead of schedule for getting to work today. The clock right before me now tells me, the map app tells me I'll be arriving at work at 7:09. And I don't need to be at work until 7:30. So I'm way ahead of schedule. No reason to drive so fast, ride so fast. Let me pull the speed down to lately I've been measuring my velocity by my RPMs. That'd make a good t-shirt. Gauge your life velocity not in miles per hour but in RPMs. It's a little bit complex, but I think you get the idea. How fast is the heart beating? Keep those heartbeats down unless you have a good reason to get them up. Try not to let the moments pass too quick. So I'm slowly dropping the speed down. Make sure that I can interact with this oncoming traffic okay. And that should bring the whole vibe of this video down. Look at this ladder right there. The whole vibe of this video should come down. I feel myself kind of relaxing a little bit. So good and effective use of time. That's number 2. Always striving to do that. Number 3 is the development and maintenance of good and sound life principles. This is 7 and 21. I work hard to develop them and to review them on a daily basis, to keep what's worthwhile, to modify and adjust as needed, and to discard if necessary. Number 4 is the cultivation of good emotional reactions. Just to react well to the challenges of life. To not fly off the handle. Or to overreact in any way. Next is the pursuit of good actions. Or just trying to do good things throughout the day. The next one is the recognition of true limits and true opportunity as number 6. To honestly assess what is within my capability and what is not, and to act accordingly. Number 7, the new one, is to do one thing slowly. That kind of accords with the good emotional reactions, right? Or to not that one. It accords with the good use of time. To do one thing slowly. They're kind of part and parcel of another. Try not to multitask if I can avoid it. Try to just do one thing at a time. And if you wonder if I do this every day, I don't make videos about this every day, but I do. I do this meditation every day at this moment as I'm commuting to work. Sometimes a little faster, usually a little bit slower. What I mean by faster or slower is in more depth. I do try to keep an even measured pace. Let me slide behind this guy. Let me make a transition to the 55 freeway north. So those are my 7 objectives. Let's go over the 21 principles, and then I'll describe the challenge. Number 1 is the principle of war. To wake every morning, be ready to go to war with everything that I hold true and everything that is dear to me. All my cherished convictions and beliefs, ready to render each of them asunder if they are found today to not be sound. What a blessing it would be to end life with nothing of certainty, just a bunch of questions. What an honest life that would have been, or at least a confused life. Number 2 is the principle of reason. If warring against my own truths is my object, reason is the instrument by which I effect that effort. And the sub-principles are honesty and objectivity. To honestly ask myself if I'm being... To be honest with myself in my thoughts and rationalizations, and to be objective in my review of the evidence. Next is the principle of this is number 3, the principle of the homunculus. The homunculus is the little mortal who lives in my head. I substitute this for the concept of a soul, because while the soul implies something that will spirit away, no pun intended, from our body at the time of our death, to live on somewhere else, either heaven or hell or something else altogether. Homunculus has no such escape. It's just another word for the consciousness. Probably should just call it consciousness, but I like the word homunculus. I picture it as a little man trapped in my cranium, just behind my ears, peeking through the windows of my eyes, listening through the orifice of my ears, and using all my other senses, pulling knobs and twisting levers, and driving and steering me through life. The interesting distinction between the homunculus and the soul is that the homunculus has no escape. He's not only sealed within my mind, he's strapped in. When I die and this whole apparatus goes cold, he'll suffocate in there, so to speak. The point is, he'll be no more. The homunculus dies with me. That's the message and the importance of the homunculus, to remember that my inner constitution is no more than my mortal self, or there's no reason to think otherwise. Next one is the principle number 4 is the home of good and evil. If the homunculus is my internal mortal, good and evil are that mortal's opinions about the world, and they are subjective. They only become objective when I can reach some agreement with other sentient creatures, particularly, of course, humans. I can have the opinion that it's a good idea to get a quality education. That's my subjective subjective assessment of good, and that it's bad to not get a good education. Generally speaking, education tends to lift many boats. Lack of education tends to hold us back. If you agree with me, then we now have an objective. We have an objective agreement between the two of us, at least, where we can look at decisions and objectively judge them as good or bad towards that end, like maintaining good grades as a young growing up, so that we can maybe gain some scholarships that can help us further our education. Those would be considered objectively good choices towards the objective goal of improving our education, which within each of our minds is a subjective perspective. So the homunculus is the keeper and the arbiter of these things. It's almost like having in that little chamber where the homunculus lives behind my eyeballs, it's like there's a file cabinet in there. 2 file cabinets, in fact. One labeled good, one labeled evil. And the homunculus files away their opinions, their subjective opinions of each. And that's the home of good and evil. I don't think that good and evil resides out in the stars. I don't think there's any objective good and evil in the universe. Other than the curious mandate, it's not really curious, it makes perfect sense from a chemical point of view, the mandate of biology to reproduce as basically an objectively good thing. Anything related to survival seems to be something that nature deems to be good, and it stands apart from us by virtue of as evidenced by the virtue of fact of that we're here. Next is the principle of purpose. Funny that I was just talking about purpose. I believe that there's only one, like I said, objective purpose in the world, and that is for life at least, that is to survive as long as we can and to get as many copies of our genes into the next generation as possible. Well, that's a pretty straightforward purpose, and not very satisfying or fulfilling, and I've already done that. My kid's an adult now. I think I've satisfied that nature's objective purpose. So what else? Well, I've decided that my purpose personally is virtue, the pursuit of virtue, where I define virtue as the improvement of well-being. Well, well-being is basically happiness over unhappiness, and more particularly happiness not at the expense of others. It's kind of a complex, convoluted thing, but I think we all have a pretty good sense for what I mean by that, by well-being being happiness and improved living, improved circumstances, and whatever I can do to help improve that for myself and others, or maybe reverse that for others and myself. Well, myself and others, because you know how it is, right? The oxygen mask dropping on the airplane, right? Secure your mask on your own face first before you help others, because that ensures that you're going to be a good instrument and vehicle for the rescue of others if you can get yourself squared away. Likewise with well-being. Oh, there's a GS. Next is here's a new one. No, I already talked about that new one. So the next is the atomic principle. That's principle number 6. The atomic principle simply states that, excuse me, I had to scratch my mouth. The universe is made of bits and pieces that flow and change and forever transform, and that it's a worthwhile thing to keep that in mind, to remember that. So too you and I will be dust again, whether we're burned up in the fires of cremation or interred in the earth, chock full of chemicals, in a vain attempt to keep our the appearance of our mortal constitution intact. That will all fall to ruin. We'll give it enough time. We're all destined to be dust again, even our bones. There's a little vertebrae of a small animal that I found out in the desert last week, sitting under the bridge. I placed it there to remind me of the atomic principle, because it's been out in the desert so long that just touching it a little bit roughly and it falls to dust. So do you and I. Next, number 7 is the principle of nature. Everything in the universe has some particular nature, ways of being, doing, acting. A lot of it is determined, life, a lot of it is determined by our genetics. Other inanimate objects also have natures. The weather has a particular nature, regions have a particular nature based on their climate and geology. You get the idea. It's good to keep in mind what the nature of things are, so that we can accommodate that in our expectations. In particular, the natures of human beings, because humans tend to have a particular nature as well. And it's good to know what that is and to expect that. Make a little note to myself after this meditation is complete when I talk about my challenge. Maybe I can apply that to that. The next is the principle of maturity. That's principle number 8. And the sub-principles of wisdom and fortitude. Maturity is that state that we arrive at when we have experience in life and we choose to benefit from that experience by remembering it and applying the memory of that experience to our future decisions. But that's only useful if we have the will and strength to actually apply those decisions. We learn from our lessons going forward. If we make the same mistakes over and over, then all the wisdom in the world is basically for naught. So that latter component, here we go, come on in buddy, I'll back off. That latter component is the fortitude part. Fortitude is the ability to push forward, maybe through uncomfortable decisions because we know better. Maybe it's because we learned the lesson ourselves, or maybe we gained from the experience of someone else. Either, of course, is good. So wisdom is maturity is wisdom and fortitude. Next is the social principle, number 9. Human beings are social animals. We need one another to survive. And our very best ends are social ends. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't go alone. I think that's why I lead with that concept. Because going alone is what causes us to encounter what I'll come to in just a minute, called the great indifference. That's when we want to turn away from the night and back to our fellows. And we really embrace the social principle, the principle of being with others and contributing to the common good. Moving my vehicle forward in the same direction as all these others. We're all pushing towards some common end, even if that end isn't necessarily the most worthy or the smartest end. We're all in that ship together, and there's something good about the fellowship therein. Next is, after the social principle, here's a new one, is the principle of public speaking. Well, it simply means that when I'm talking about other people, I try to imagine that they're standing right there. This is a simple exercise. This is a simple tool, if I can remember it, to keep me from gossiping. Like, I'm going to have lunch with a friend today, and my friend does not want to gossip. But sometimes when the conversation starts to falter, you know how it goes. You turn to topics of interest. Topics like catching up about the people who aren't in the room. And I don't want to do that. I don't like doing that. For obvious reasons. It's not a good thing. So, to prevent myself from falling into that, I'm going to remember the principle of public speaking. Whatever I say about others, imagine that they're listening to my words right there and then. If I have nothing to say, no good conversation, no fodder for the dialogue, then I won't say anything at all. Or maybe I can go armed with some topics to discuss. That's probably better. That's a very good idea, I think, if I do say so myself. It's an obvious idea. Next is the principle of the Feast of Offal. The Feast of Offal is the waste and byproduct of our undisciplined, unprincipled life. And I'm guilty of this. I'm the kind of person that can just kind of get a little upset and express my frustration. I'm much better now than I was years and years ago. Wow, what's that? Is that crow? Wow, a crow chasing a hawk or something? There we go. So, sorry, I had to maneuver the, get out of the way of this 241 south to the right here would have taken me back to Irvine. It's a shortcut, but it's a toll road. It costs money, so I don't take it. This is an interesting pass here. A lot of the water from the Los Angeles' San Bernardino mountain range would come filtering through here. Anyway, The Feast of Offal, all that waste and byproduct of all that undisciplined living. You know, all that upset that gets bottled up and comes spewing out. Yeah, I'm guilty of that. I'm better now than I ever was. You know, I'm not the kind of guy to get violent, but I would get upset sometimes in the past, and I'm sorry for that, and I'm working to make amends for that. It's not right to ambush anyone, especially your family, with you know, your unkempt emotions. Especially because the funny thing about it is that we tend to, you know, swallow that up. That's why I call it a feast. It's almost like a form of voyeurism to watch somebody else have a temper tantrum. It's like, you know, relishing in their own suffering, you know, because it's not us. That's not a good thing. And then later, it's almost like we started, it's like my dog who like has this habit of eating grass, and then he always barfs it up 20 minutes later. Seems to me that when we dine on the Feast of Offal of others, that look at all the flowers. There's a little canyon up here to the right. I'm going to show you guys. It's really pretty. I look at it every morning through the seasons, year in, year out. When we indulge in that feast, we kind of contaminate ourselves on the inside, and it seems like eventually we'll pay the price in our own upset, our own blatant show and spewing of upset. Can't think of a better way to say that. So I try not to do that. I try not to engage in the feast, in the consumption of the feast of others' suffering and their displays of upset, and I try not to perform that myself. And no, it does not have the effect of bottling up and getting bigger inside. I find other ways to release that. I find there's a lot of maturity in giving it, recognizing it, and saying, "Oh, hey, here it comes." And I do things like, for example, one of the things that I do to avoid that in my own life is that I burn the candle at both ends. And as I have a lot of energy right now. I'm ready for the day's work, but by 7:30 tonight, I'm going to be burnt. And I'm particularly dangerous. It's a particularly dangerous time for me. I'm liable to get upset if something provokes me. Again, you know, I'm not a violent way, but I can get, you know, upset. You know, it's like, gosh darn it, you know, something pisses me off, you know, and just, you know, in kind of an average type of a way. But I don't like doing that. So I know that if I can get to bed by 8:30, that there's a far less likelihood that that'll happen, because basically it takes me out of the game. So there's that. That's, again, that harkens back to the principle of nature. It's my nature to burn my candle at both ends. It's also my nature to be worn out. I'm a morning person, and the evening is a vulnerable time for me. So that's enough about the Feast of Offal. That's number 11. Principle number 12 is the principle of temperance. And there are 3 sub-principles: suffering, simplicity, and apathy. Temperance is the ability to control our consumption of anything. Food, sex, work, play, whatever. Drink, of course. Too much coffee. Too much cake. There's always cake at work. If we suffer when we deny ourselves our want. That's why it's a sub-principle, temperance. Simplicity, the simple life, isn't by definition a temperate life, and temperance then is no longer a goal to strive after when it's part and parcel of our living. And apathy, which is the more complex idea, sounds like a bad thing, but actually apathy is simply, as I define it, the recognition, or as the Stoics would define it, the recognition of what is and what is not within our control, and to not be upset or even dwell on, or even very, very much considering of things that are not within our control. Be apathetic towards that. A flat tire is not within my control right now. Starting to rain is not within my control right now. These things I will not be upset about. What is within my control? My reaction to these events. how I choose to react to the flat tire or the sudden downpour of rain. Those are within my control. Flat tire on a motorcycle is a dangerous thing. I just grab both handlebars and carefully make my way to the side of the road, stop, and call a tow truck. Sudden onslaught of downpouring of rain, I'd get off at the next off-ramp, and I've got rain gear in the back, and find myself a nice little bit of sheltered space and put on the rain gear. Next is agency and the great indifference. This is what I was referring to before about going alone causes us to encounter this thing called the great indifference. Let's start with that. The great indifference is the emptiness of the universe. If you want a recognition that there is no God, or apparently there seems to be no God, or if there is a God, it's a deistic God that appears to be hidden. There's no good reason to think that there's any sentient mind behind all of this, or any guardian oversight, or fatherly figure, or motherly figure looking after us. We are apparently alone, and going alone, particularly into the deep wilderness, will either do one of two things. It will cause us to see that awful fact, awful for the fear that it arouses, and the sudden recognition of apparent mortality in our lives, or we may throw up a whole raft of guards to protect us against that. Seeing the face of God in the apparent design of nature, or the voice of God in the wind and in our minds. And I would suggest that a lot of these things are unfounded, that no one can really demonstrate that there is anything to that. So I tend to disregard those as anecdote and personal stories and wishful thinking. The apparent fact for me, spending a lifetime of regularly going into the wilderness, the deep wilderness alone, is that it's really empty out there. It really is a great indifference. Agency then is all of this. That woman over there, she's an agent. The man in that car, he's an agent. I'm an agent. And all this stuff around us, this bridge and Carl's Jr. sign, these are all the artifacts of that agency. And the fact of the presence of agents, and all life is an agent. Those plants, those trees are agents as well. All evidence of these things, along with our artifacts, gives us a reassurance that we're not alone, and masks the fact of the great indifference such that we're comforted. That's why I have to go alone. That's why I lead with my whole good life and going alone idea, is I lead with the concept of going alone. First, encounter that thing and come back from the edge, and then make what you will of what you found. What I made was the good life. Thinking. It's a whole chapter in the book. The same thing I'm talking about right now. That's agency and the great indifference. Next, after agency and the great indifference, is nice Ducati. After that is the best seat in the house. I strive to not want to be anyone else, be anywhere else, or be doing anything else, but to simply be okay with where I am, what I am, and who I am, and what I'm doing right now. It's a tricky balance to be content, while all the while striving to improve. But I know from experience it can be done, and it's a good thing. Next is the path of wildness. This whole good life, I hesitate to use the word philosophy, but probably it is. This whole framework, this whole good life philosophical framework, this whole good life way of living, thinking, began with the path of wildness when I was living in Japan, and all those young people would write to me saying, "How do I live? How do I get unstuck from this rut that I found myself in of mediocre job in the small town I grew up in, when I want to have adventure?" Because they would write to me because I lived in Japan and I was having those adventures, and I had a family and a decent job, and I'd managed to do that thing that they were dreaming of. And I came up with the path of wildness as a simple formula to recognize the thing that you want or need to do, to give yourself some time to think about it, to collect the facts, to be able to make an informed decision. And when that time came, to either make the decision based on what we had learned, Or give yourself a little more time. Eventually, though, you got to stop giving yourself more time. Otherwise, you'll waste away a decade still pondering and mulling over it, and then your opportunity is gone. You're a different person now. If it's time to make that decision and you still don't have enough facts, but you've fought long enough, then grant yourself the benefit of a little nudge from your instinct. What do your instincts say? And run with that. Now, the instincts may not be right. They may lead you right off the edge of a life cliff to failure. And that's a warning. That's a truth, and I can't protect you from that. And you may die, and you may suffer, and you may lose a lot, and you may be regarded as a fool. And people may say they told you so, and they'll gloat over it for the end of your years. But I'd also argue that you've gained something intangible that few will recognize, but it's very deep and very worthwhile. That is the reward of making that effort. That comes to the very next item, which is the risk of avoiding risk. There are two levels of risk in life. The surface level risks of money, education, spouse, and family. And the deep level risk of not living the dream that you wanted to live, not living the life that you wanted to live, not taking this opportunity to become the man or woman that you want to be, even if you don't know exactly what that is. I'd argue that it's easy to acquire the first surface level risk. Well, not super easy, but it works for a lot of people. Just look over those hills, over these buildings and all the track homes. These are track homes full of people who have achieved that goal. What's a lot harder to find, look at all those. What's a lot harder to find are those that have achieved that deeper goal. That goal of living the dream that they set up, that they heard calling them through their inner mind from an early age. If they don't have that, if those track homes are what they want, then they're lucky. They're kind of lucky. Then good for them. Maybe they don't need that. But if you're one of those, one of us that are called by something else, and that's the deep level risk. Because if you just go after that surface level stuff and you would neglect the deep level stuff, you're going to reach a point where you realize it's too late, and you're left holding handfuls of what will then maybe appear as pretty sand. Fistfuls of it, in fact. I know it's a first world problem, but it's a real problem, and hopefully one day everybody will get to enjoy that problem. What a great thing when the robots can take on the work, and we can attend to self-actualization. Not quite there yet. Gotta take that gamble. Next is the sin and damnation. I think this is number 16. There's 5 types of sin in my worldview: falsity, credulity, faith, superstition, and dogma. And they're all the same thing. They're basically choosing to accept something that may not be true because it's comforting, because it gets us where we want to be and gives us what we want in the immediate here and now, and comforts in some way. It gives us, makes us just feel good about the life that we're living. But the problem is, it may not be true. And what a thing that's not true. Simply, you have to ask yourself, do you want to live with things that aren't true? Things that are false? Credulity, are you willing to believe things easily? Faith, are you willing to call that belief good evidence and make it a virtue when it's not? Superstition, a blatant label for what we know is probably nonsense. Dogma, authoritative proclamations of truth codified within institutions, who then stand behind and give false weight and credence to what is stated to be true. All these things, falsity, credulity, faith, superstition, and dogma, are just the same thing, just various flavors of it's like various flavors of ice cream, various flavors of untruth, or these unsubstantiated claims of truth. The damnation part is the living your life believing things that may or may not be true. So next is sin and damnation. The next is complete oblivion. When we die, I believe that I have no reason to think otherwise, that we'll survive. So I think we'll be completely blown away. We'll be completely gone. Homunculus will die, become dust. There'll be no final reunion with anyone that we went before us or who we left behind. No reconciliation, wrongs that have not been solved, fixed, and no final justice. Because there appears to be no justice giver. There'll be no afterlife to have justice in. Just 3 more now. The Great Life Adventure. If you're called to do adventure, if you feel that inside of you, there's that. I think some of us have kind of an instinctual longing for adventure. A lot of us have that. By all means, do it. Even if you die young. What a worthy end. You'll be glad you did. I made a video yesterday about TKO Sam's treasure. That's TKO Sam adding another crown jewel to his lifetime of great life adventures. Makes all the difference. And then finally, 2 more. One is the Season of Philosophy. If you live according to, following even some of these objectives and principles, you might find yourself in a position someday with a story to tell. My simple suggestion is to pen that story when the words are there, when you feel the motivation. If you wait, the words may no longer be there, or they may be different. The moment will have passed. Whatever book or blog or story or painting or photograph that you might otherwise have been able to have achieved as your art will no longer be possible. So strike, as they say, when the iron's hot, when the muse speaks. That is the season of philosophy, and it can come at any time of life. And don't worry if it comes early. It may wind up looking like nonsense when you're older, but that nonsense is part and parcel of what you became as an older man or woman. And then lastly, arena and utility. Life is an arena for the execution of our good living, utilizing our objectives and principles, which hang like instruments around our belt. And now on to my challenge. So I'm struggling at work a little bit to balance my workload. I have a methodology that I've developed that I'm trying to promote. And I'm finding, though, that my efforts to promote it, because I think it can help others, my efforts to do that have caused me to drop the ball a little bit on my own responsibilities. And I had an embarrassing moment this week where I really did let things fall. So I'm trying to get back on my feet, and I find myself sometimes dwelling on this failure. But I made efforts. I reached out to the people that I feel I let down, and I've made an effort to change my work style, to refocus my strategy, and my emphasis and my focus. So that's kind of just trying to wrap some of the objectives and principles to that. So my objective is the good use of time. I only have so much time during the work week, and I do a lot of work overtime. I do work from home a lot, but still, I only have so much time. And the good use of time, I thought, was to try to evangelize some of these ideas around the organization. I think it's going to make a difference. But clearly, I didn't balance that in such a way as to make sure that I could attend to my responsibilities in the way I should, in the way I'm expected to, in the way the organization has every right to expect me to do. So I'm being honest in my assessment, and I'm using reason to recognize where my failure was. And I'm also applying the idea of recognizing my true limits, which is I can't do all of this. And my true opportunity is to move forward and make amends and try to do better. And then also the atomic principle, recognizing that it's all for, ultimately, it's all sand anyway. So I won't get too mad. I'll have good emotional reactions about all of that. It's interesting how all these principles have a hand in this circumstance and play a part in my resolution. And so that's it. And I think I'll go ahead and sign off for now. Thank you for joining me for my Good Life meditation for today as I start the day on what did I call it? The 10th day of May, and I basically did this through my whole commute. I get off just two more exits. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.